Okay. Okay, so this is a project that I'm working on currently. It's a serving tray that the bottom has two curved inlays. Um, like Gene, I hadn't anticipated doing a show and tell on this, and so the pictures you see are mainly ones that I took to send to the woman I'm building it for, just as updates. So there's a lot that's missing from the build, but in any event, um, it's a commission piece. Um, she wasn't real sure what she wanted up front. What she did know is that this is a uh, inlay cutting board that I made a few years back, and she saw this and wanted it to look something like this. Um, so she wanted something light on the background, which ruled out walnut. So that meant maple and cherry. She wanted it real simple and light. Um, um, so let's go back. Okay. Um, so she wanted two inlays. She did not want them intersecting. Um, she wanted the handles incorporated into the frame. Uh, there are serving trays where even with frames that you can get metal handles or aluminum handles that are screwed down into the frame. She wanted the handles like this. Okay, so the build, let me go through this. Okay, the build has two components, as you might guess. There's the frame. The handles are, I wouldn't say they're tricky, but to make the handles, I already had a template from some trays I had built before. So what I did is I took the stock pieces for the two ends. I double-sided taped those together and then taped those to the template. Took them to the drill press, took a Forster bit and hogged out most of the space. Then took that whole stack over to the router table with a pattern bit and cut the rest out. I then took that over to the bandsaw and cut the curves for the handle because they set higher than the long sides. Took that to the bandsaw, rough cut that, took it over to the belt sander and cleaned those up a little bit. Rabbited the bottom for the bottom of the frame for the bottom to sit up into. Mitered the corners, and then you can see those green pieces of tape. I learned this a few years ago. I found it almost impossible to clamp something like this together. So I use painter's tape, and it works. It's simple. It works really, really well. Really kind of scores up those miters quite nicely. The second part of it is, of course, the bottom. First step, of course, was to glue up the strips of maple and cherry. That's pretty straightforward. The trick is that the overall width of this is 16 inches, which is too big for my planer. So using cauls, I had to do as best as I could to get all those strips to lay out flush. In areas where it wasn't flush, I had to sand those out. The inlays are the tricky part. Because it's curved, the cutout for the inlays has to be the exact width of the inlays themselves. So I took a palm router with a 3/8 inch pattern bit, taped the template to the bottom, and then cut about 3/4 of the way through that wood. Used a bandsaw to cut the rest of the way to split it into two parts. Took it over to the router table to clear out the little tabs that were left in that slot from the bandsaw. Then I created 3 strips for each inlay, each an 1/8 of an inch wide or thick, 2 walnut pieces and a white oak piece. Getting those glued in there is a real pain. As you clamp, even starting in the middle, as you clamp, everything wants to scoot around. So you've got to clamp a little bit and then tap a little bit to get the edges lined up again, because if they're not lined up perfectly, you're going to get gaps. And I ended up with a few. But also, again, because I can't run it through the planer afterwards, I had to cut little notches in the cawls to clear the inlays. When I first put them in, sat proud by about 1/8 or so, but because I had to hold everything as flush as I could, I notched out the cawls, and that seemed to work pretty well. So I did that twice, once for each of the inlays. Did the first inlay first, glued it up, let that dry, sanded it down, and then did the second inlay. Let's see where we're at with this. Okay, oops, sorry about that. That's what it looked like after the first inlay. One thing I forgot to mention was our keys. Let me jump ahead a little bit. There we go. Miters, as I'm sure all of you know, are not that strong of a joint. So what I did is put some keys in, and I had built this little jig a couple of years ago, just actually to make some trays. So I used that to cut the slots for the keys. The keys themselves, as you might guess, I'm having trouble seeing these. There we go. They're walnut. And that's pretty much it. I'm currently in the process of putting on multiple coats of wipe-on poly. I'm now at the, I think, 5th coat at this point. I think I'll stop with 6 on the frame and the bottom of the bottom, and then put another 3 on the part of the bottom that shows. Okay, I believe that's it. Does anybody have any questions?
This is Bob. I have a question.
Sure.
You cut all the way through for the inlays, right? So it's basically a laminate instead of an inlay.
Oh, well, technically, actually, that is true. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
I had thought about a true inlay, but the bottom is only a 1/2 inch thick. So I decided to go with this, but you are right.
Because if it was a true inlay, it might have been easier to force the the pieces into a groove that had fixed edges. Instead of pressing it together, I guess you would
Mhm.
press it in, you know?
Yeah, you press from the top. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, again, I thought about that. The strips would have been, um, I didn't think all the way through it. It seemed harder to do for some reason, but it'd be really interesting to try doing that to compare the two.
Hmm.
So I'm reminded about an inlay demo that David Hickson did. You recall that he did a um, part of his demonstration included some Pennsylvania Dutch artwork that had curves, and he demonstrated a process of using like a compass design or tool to create the arc, and then scraping out the channel using a special um, plane that he has for doing that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Creating the inlay strips started out with veneer and then used the knife to cut the veneer. Didn't Joel, you're on? Didn't Jeff Latta do something like that too? Didn't Steve Latta? Who is it? Latta? Joel? Joel's might not. Yeah, Joel's not on anymore. We had a demo. I think it was Latta that did the same thing. The guy
Yeah, it
from
is Steve
Lancaster.
Latta, and he made his own set of tools that in conjunction with the the tool maker in Maine there. I'm blocking on the name, but
Lee Nielsen.
Lee Nielsen, yeah, they produced his tools, and then I heard somewhere that they weren't making them anymore with the pandemic and everything. But there's a radius cutting tool and a tool for doing straight cuts along a table leg or something like that.
Yep.
I guess the other thing I was curious about is you probably can't steam it because then it won't glue up well or something like that.
Hmm.
Well, an eighth of
Yeah.
an inch thickness on oak or walnut should just bend with the, minor curves that the long curves that you're using, Jack. I would imagine. I bent walnut dry that way, just um, that was a little thicker than an eighth.
Yeah, I've done two boards and then this, and yeah, I've never had the walnut and the white oak are pretty flexible, at least at an eighth of an inch.
Yeah.
Part of the trick is that my planer will go down to an eighth of an inch, but it shatters real bad on the front and the back end of the strips. And I don't have a drum sander. So what I got to do is get really like strips that are at least 50% longer than what they need to be, and then run those through and then cut off the bad ends.
You might consider thick veneer or laminate veneer together to
Mm,
achieve a thicker strip, and then you can use an X-Acto knife or something similar to cut the height of your strips, and then glue them together.
actually,
Um,
that'd be a lot easier because um, uh, ripping those eighth-inch strips is a real joy.
Yep, wasted a lot of wood. They use
Uh,
a cutting edge on to make veneer, so the wood waste is minimal. Um, yeah, thank you for that.
Sure.
An excellent presentation of that the tray, and I like the blending of the colors and the species of wood.
Thanks.